Well, thank you all so much for joining us for our think tank this morning on driving commercial relevance. This is really a hot topic, Graham, because it's very dynamic. We're going to be talking about the importance of behavior-based decision-making at early stage development, which we know is critically important given the demand on resources from time to money. Our focus today is what are the key considerations, the questions that we need to be asking to identify real opportunity. For example, opportunity with market traction. What are the key activities, analysis needed? And are there models for success out there? We have a dynamic group of leaders with us today to shed some light on these important questions. And first, I'd like to introduce our host this morning, Anshal Purohit, who along with her team provides strategy, market research, print, digital promotional education, and public relations to their healthcare clients. Next is Dr. Shannon Dahl, a 2018 PharmaVOICE 100, who serves as Chief Scientific Officer of Cell Care Therapeutics. And she's an expert in regenerative medicine. She previously co-founded Humacyte, where she held leadership roles in technology, product translation, pipeline, corporate and commercial development. I tell you how many patents she has to her name, but I literally have lost count and they change every single day. And now we have Mary Frances Harmon, a 2020 PharmaVOICE 100, who brings more than 30 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry to her role at PTC, where she oversees strategic and operational leadership for policy, advocacy, and patient communications and engagement. And she's a 2020 New Jersey Bio Heart Recipient awardee. Kinnari Patel, Pharm.D, a 2018 PharmaVOICE 100, who serves as Chief Operating Officer and Executive VP Development for Rocket Therapeutics. She has spent 15 years in rare disease R&D and has led both small molecule and biological development programs from phase 1 through phase 4 across multiple therapeutic areas. And if you get to her, she'll show you how she lit up New York on Rare Disease Day. So ladies, let's get started. Anshal, I know this topic is of great interest to you. So please tell us how Purohit Navigation is raising the bar in this area.
Thanks, Taren. I guess first I just want to say I'm so happy to be here with these co-panelists, and just this event you put together has been amazing. So thank you for all of that. Yes, this topic is very near and dear to my firm, and I think is one that warrants kind of a second look now, as a lot of the determinants to commercial success, particularly for early stage ventures, are evolving so quickly. And so, you know, at our firm, we're kind of looking at the fact that as disease states are getting more specialized, products are getting more targeted, we really have to understand early on just what we're going to be asking audiences to do and what market uptake will really look like behaviorally. We have to understand how those inputs can impact a TPP and whether actually we can optimize commercial success even at the clinical stage by incorporating some of those perspectives into TPP planning, clinical trial planning. So at our firm, Purohit Navigation, we have put together a strategy and analytics practice that really works closely with a lot of our preclinical partners on initiatives like this. We're using tools that are traditionally kind of reserved for later in the process, like journey mapping and things like that, pulling them forward, as well as putting together a lot of targeted and customized research. And we found some pretty good success, I think, in managing clinical trial design and ultimately successful market entry. So I know my colleagues, Dr. Dahl, Ms. Harmon, Ms. Patel, have been doing a lot of similar things. We had a chance to speak before this, so I'm just really looking forward to a productive discussion here. So thanks.
Me too, Anshal. So let's get it started. So let's talk about what are some of those key inputs that determine commercial relevance. And I know you all are coming at this from a variety of perspectives based on your own pipelines and your own clinical development programs. So I'm just going to kick it off. Shannon, I'm looking right at you right there. Why don't you start us off if you don't mind?
Sure. Thanks for having us. This is great to be here. So at Cell Care Therapeutics, we're developing a biologics platform that can heal damaged blood vessels and restore healthy blood tissue barriers, which are critical to resolving most inflammatory diseases. And there's a lot of major unmet needs in the eye, lung, brain, and gut. So we're preclinical stage. So as we're thinking about developing our biologics platform, it's really critical for us to be focused on what are the unmet needs not addressed by other therapies that are out there right now. What do those patients look like? What's the pathophysiology behind the triggers of disease that aren't being resolved by others? And how can we really make sure there's a product patient fit? And I love what Anshal said about the TPP. You know, that's really a guiding light in terms of mapping out the patient population, the endpoints you might target in a clinical trial, understanding what mechanisms are driving those endpoints, and building your whole product optimization and development path towards demonstrating success for those elements.
Excellent. So, you know, Mary Frances, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you, if you can build on what Shannon was saying there in terms of what are some of those key determinants that you're looking at in terms of commercial relevance from your perspective at PTC?
Yeah, so at PTC, we actually have a dedicated team that works with patient advocacy groups and patient families. And we have them, the team actually doesn't just work when things are closer to commercialization, but work in the early development stages with our internal teams so that they can bring the patient perspective to them and have those considerations as they're starting to work on these early stage molecules. Because gone are the days where a drug just has to be effective and safe. It also has to be practical, convenient, and accessible. And when I say accessible, I don't mean just from a market access or a payer pricing perspective, but from actual logistics. There are the therapies now, especially in the rare disease, that may have to be administered every other month through an infusion. Well, can these patients get to the infusion center? Is it a drug that is given in a delivery system or a dosage formulation that is convenient to that disease state? If it's a pill and the disease has limited, or the patients have limited swallowing, that's not going to work. Or you know, those types of things really need to start to be considered early on.
Excellent. And Kinnari, you come at from another perspective as well in terms of the rare disease community, where some of your targets may already be predetermined because of a need. So how are you managing this?
Our philosophy at Rocket really starts with the disease selection. We're working in rare disease space, and all of the diseases we work on have a huge unmet medical need, meaning these patients in our 5 diseases we're working actively on, the only therapeutic option, if a patient is lucky enough, is a transplant, whether it's a heart transplant or bone marrow transplant. If they find a matched donor. So the unmet medical need automatically creates a demand, right? And what we've done in the first few years at the company before we even had our first INDs is spending a lot of time with patients, patient advocacy groups, as well as treating physicians. So I myself, the CEO and the CMO, we've gone to hospitals in Asia, in Europe, in US, all over, to understand these diseases. If we understand the disease complexity, if we understand what's important to the patient, accordingly, we can design a clinical trial that makes sense for these patients. And to do this and to really address that medical need, our philosophy is really simple. Do things the right way from the beginning. So we made investments before even starting a phase 1 into commercial grade products. And we really make sure that every patient gets the highest quality product and make the data and information transparent to the patient community. So our philosophy started before we had INDs, and now we have 2 programs in the registrational studies. And our focus continues to be that the more we know the community, the unmet medical need, the better we can design the products to meet their needs, and therefore the commercial demand comes with it.
Excellent. Anshal, why don't you round us out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an interesting discussion, and I think that it's almost like layers that we've been considering. So there's the unmet need that we're talking about that obviously is a key component, and then there's what Shannon and Mary Frances were talking about too, which is sort of that behavioral change or that behavioral piece, either feeding into the TPP and then layering into actual adoption. And then one of the other things that we look at kind of even on top of that is sort of protocol change. When we look at categories like HIV, for example, if we're looking, you know, when PrEP came out, we were thinking about PrEP. We're moving even to the left of treatment, and that was going to require systemic protocol change. And so those types of considerations even are so important to consider at the early stage, just in terms of, you know, commercial relevance and, you know, how much work we're going to have to do as a company to really break into the market. It's just important to know those factors. So sort of parallel to the drug development process is also just this idea of planning for commercial success and really ensuring commercial relevance. So I think all of these factors are things that are really critical, and I have really evolved as critical factors. I mean, back in the day, we were just looking at market size and kind of quantitative measures of opportunity. So we've changed quite a lot, I think, in industry.
Right, I think you're absolutely right. So we're looking at, what are those early opportunities and how are they going to translate into the marketplace? And I think where companies are giving that a lot more consideration. Resource dollars are tight, but at the same time, we're really looking to see, let's talk about how small to mid-sized companies are really driving innovation and talking about where they're placing their bets and why they're placing their bets in those places. Who would like to kick us off? You can raise your hand. Go, Kinnari, you're up.
I think we're driving innovation by the platform we're using. So our platform, ideally, as you see behind the wall here at the front desk, our philosophy is simple. We're seeking gene therapy cures. So we're working on innovative platform where it's really hopefully one and done therapy. And if we treat the patients with their own cells and address the disease at the target of the mutation, then hopefully we can correct the disease itself and have a lifetime of cure. And working in patient population that happen to be pediatrics, if you target the patients early on in life in early diagnosis, they really have the more sustainable benefit, right? Which helps with the commercialization and the payer markets as well.
I also think small companies are really taking on market shaping now because of all of this innovation in a way that they weren't before. So because we're looking at these really innovative sort of targeted disease states at the smaller companies now, and all the innovation, or a lot of the innovation that's happening there, the idea of educating the market and shaping the market is coming on the shoulders of these small firms. So they're playing such a significant role in actually the narrative of what a disease is. What are the confines of a disease state even, is really shifted left, I feel like, on that continuum.
Agreed.
I was going to say, I can speak to that. So at CellCare, again, with our platform, we're focused on blood tissue barriers, and in health, these are comprised of tight cell-cell junctions that prevent leakage of fluid from the blood vessels into the surrounding tissue. And the cells that control those signals and regulate the health are mesenchymal stem cells, and they secrete signals, microRNA-rich extracellular vesicles and proteins that regulate that health. But in disease, inflammation drives dysregulated function, and the blood vessels are leaking because the cell-cell junctions are separated. And so our product is comprised of the secretions of those cells, the proteins and microRNA vesicles, that can restore tight junctions and restore barrier health. And so to your point, Anshal, it's really about educating in some ways that this is a coordinated function. And educating as well that a product that has multiple mechanisms of action can really be advantageous over, single mechanism of action products in complex disease states such as these.
So, and from a different perspective, especially in the rare disease population, often these diseases, they have nothing. They have no one to support them. And as the companies come in, we're often able to take some of these advocacy groups from the kitchen table to something broader. I mean, it's simple as helping and supporting them develop a website so they can reach these patients and really start to communicate with them, start to collect information. I think if you enter and start to consider a disease where they have a natural history database, I mean, that's the nirvana to a drug developer. And I think the smaller companies looking at these small niche, rare, untreated populations are actually helping to grow that information and hopefully advance development in that area down the road.
Agreed. And as we see the evolution of all of these small to mid-sized companies, they're not so quick to spin off their assets as they were 5 years ago. They are taking them through development and into commercialization, which is pretty unprecedented. And it requires a whole nother layer of skill sets, a whole nother layer of leadership within your organizations to be able to do this, because it's not what was before. So the status quo has changed quite a bit. Would you all agree?
Completely, yes.
She's yes, and I'm tired.
I think too, the small to mid-size, they seem, I don't want to use the word risky, but they're a little bit more aggressive in what they'll go after as well, as opposed to a larger company that is looking at therapies that reach certain milestones, whether in population or revenue generation. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's a little bit more willingness to push the boundaries in the smaller companies.
It's calculated risk, right? So we're not just talking, right?
No.
But I do agree that there's a lot more agility, a lot more flexibility with smaller companies. And while their resources might be tighter, they're placing really well-considered bets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, with a couple companies now, and I think at one of the rare disease conferences, one of the keynote speakers said, rare disease is sort of individually rare, but collectively common. And so I think a lot of these small companies are able to have that philosophy in terms of target development. Shannon, kind of going back to what you said in terms of, multiple disease states, we can flex to think about that, early stage in our clinical program, maybe, disease A will be a small sphere, but that same target will ultimately expand and get us pretty far. So I think that's an interesting outlook, and it may be a difference, Mary Frances, like you were saying, in terms of philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're not in the rare disease space, and so one of our approaches is really being strategic about building a strong, leveraging the return on investment, making sure that the investment we're putting in early really addresses many markets and can be leveraged as a strong platform.
Right, it's placing those bets in those strategic places. So that's excellent. So, the next phase of our conversation naturally leads to what you were just talking about, Shannon, is how can companies optimize behavior-based outcomes earlier in the process? And I think maybe Anshal, you can talk to this a little bit, because I think you have a very particular interest in this and the philosophy and the strategy behind this thought process.
Yeah, and we just really believe strongly that kind of thinking backwards is helpful. And so, as we are moving, and I know all of you on the panel here agree, because we've had the chance to talk about it. The idea of really thinking through commercial relevance and commercial success in the context of the ask, even at an early stage, is so important, because as we've all discussed already, it can help inform our clinical program, but can also help us, sort of determine corporate strategy in terms of our commercialization strategy, as well as, what we can expect in terms of outcomes. Oncology, I think, is a great example where there's so much innovation in oncology, but when we get down to it, community oncologists are very algorithmic in their behavior. And so we have to think about the market as a whole, what other asks are going to be coming at them, and how we're going to actually shift that behavior based on what technology we're bringing forward. And I think that was really relevant, for example, when the diagnostics, started to come, right? So all the tissue typing and things, we had a lot of different platforms that were launching at oncology at the time. And, the behavioral piece was so important to think about even early stage in terms of determining a go-forward plan for development.
And this is really a mind shift too, because it's not how companies used to think in the good old days. So Kinnari, you're nodding your head. So tell us how this shift has impacted your organization.
For us, it's really been that even from our phase 1 study, we started incorporating quality of life measures into it. And we participated in a NORD and FDA sponsored disease meeting, for example, for one of our diseases in Ph.D, to understand patient inputs and what's important to them and how their quality of life measures are impacted and what it means. So spending time of understanding, like, not just what it means from hospitalizations or mortality, but really what it means from just day-to-day living, really helps us understand better how do we differentiate our product and our value proposition, right? What's the benefit risk? What's the mechanism of action from the disease? But also, how does that make, if somebody has to get hospitalized to get ex vivo lenti gene therapy, which is really individualized for patients' cells, what does that 2-3 month commitment would mean in a lifetime? So to be able to articulate that, having this information gathered, not just in phase 1, but for 15 years after a patient's treated, really allows us to know a spectrum of the disease. And that's so important, right? Especially as these therapies are not cheap at all, right?
Exactly. Mary Frances, I see you're nodding your head. So
I was going to say, to build on what Kinnari said, it's important to include that quality of life and the patient input up front, but also in their language. So it's one thing to have a quality of life questionnaire, but if the questions don't really hit on what they're experiencing, it means nothing at the end. I worked on a product once and we were doing a burden of illness survey, and we were very proud of ourselves at what we had put together. And when we put it in front of the patients, they're like, these are fine, but that's not really what we deal with. Here's the 3 things that are really affecting our quality of life. And so we were able to put those in, but in addition, we were able to change the language so that it was an everyday language. So instead of putting rhinitis, you can put a runny nose. It makes a big difference when they're filling out those questionnaires. So to have that patient connection and input that early on is critical.
As I always say, words matter, right? It's so important about how you communicate what you're looking for. So Shannon, you were also nodding in agreement there.
Yes, so for us, our lead indication is in ophthalmology, and one of the factors there is that patients often have to come for monthly treatments. And so early in the process, really being attentive to the fact that our platform has potential for disease modification, and looking at the durability early in our preclinical studies is a critical factor that we're sensitive to ensure that we have the opportunity to not only treat a new unmet need, but also treat it in a way that's more favorable for patient outcomes.
Excellent. Anshal?
Yeah, I think the role of the patient also is a key consideration, just kind of building on what everybody said. So understanding, again, what the role of the patient will be in self-administration, in self-advocacy, even in terms of decision-making. All of those factors I think are important as well. But, incorporating the patient perspective at the early stage, as Kinnari was saying, I think is also very novel. And that's kind of a really nice development, I think, and it's so critical, but is new, or relatively new. So I think it's still evolving kind of how that works best.
Exactly, and not to take anything away from this fantastic panel, but we do have another think tank later this afternoon on that patient voice, and we're going to be touching on that topic exactly, the importance of that patient voice in clinical development at the very early stages. So excellent point and way to connect us all the way through. One of the things that we talk about for this day is about raising the bar. And I'd love to put you all on the hot seat a little bit and ask you how your organizations are raising the bar. And Mary Frances, you're a 2020 PharmaVOICE 100, and I asked you this question earlier. So I'm going to start with you and let the other women gather their thoughts.
I don't know if I remember the answer. So don't judge me on consistency. No, I think, we're talking about the patient and the patient voice. And I think that that's something that PTC was very early in doing in the rare disease space. And that is dedicating a team and really putting the patients at the forefront through every aspect of development. So I do think that PTC has definitely raised the bar on patient input and centricity for our, at least, rare disease communities.
Excellent. And I will ask you, Kinnari. I'll go next.
I love the question, because one of our Rocket core values, 4 of them, the last one is elevate. So in everything we do every day, we try to elevate each other, our partners, our patients. But one of the substantial way that Rocket has been able to do this for the rare disease community, and thank you for the shout out on that, is we did the Rare Disease Day event 2 years in a row. And last year was at the Carnegie Hall, bringing music and arts and science together. And we had over 100 patient advocacy groups and members and team members attend, not just the disease we work on, but we're trying to bring the entire community of the New York City together. We were able to light up the Empire State Building with the Rare Disease Day colors and change the NASDAQ billboard to recognize the unmet medical need that impacts it. And this year, just a quick plug-in, we're doing a Rare Disease Month. And we're trying to make it every Friday an event that helps patient communities of how do you form a advocacy group if you didn't have one, right? Or how do you share information of clinical trials and understand, do you want to participate or not? And what does COVID-19 mean to you? So I think these are all the ways that we're trying to help, not just our community, but the communities in general.
Awesome. And Shannon.
Yeah, so we're really focused on, I think, the element of this panel, bringing the end goal early to guide our focus. And so, in terms of our product, we have a proprietary platform that allows us to tune the composition of our product to really address the unmet needs that we're after. So making sure we have that connection really strong and clear. And as Kinnari mentioned, in the cell and gene therapy space, there's also a lot of manufacturing considerations, and getting those right early is important. And so I think in general, we're just really committed to getting things right at the beginning, to lay a strong foundation. And so, for example, building out scalable manufacturing early, because the process really is the product, and making sure we're developing that. So we're laying a strong foundation, and our preclinical and clinical studies are predictive sequentially.
Excellent. And Anshal, I'll let you round us out.
Well, I think we have a really unique opportunity because we see sort of across when we're working with different firms. And so I've, really been working together with our team to put in place the right teams and the right thinking to really partner and ask these questions. So, we've moved very much further to the left on that continuum of development in terms of our support. I think our role is to really challenge thinking and partner with the folks that we work with, and bring some of the learning that we have from, cross industry to the table. And so, it's really just being the best that we can be constantly, which I think we all struggle with maybe, but also aim at. So pretty basic answer, but I think that's kind of what it comes down to for us,
That's awesome. Ladies, I can't thank you enough for such a rich discussion, and really some terrific insights. And I'm sure our audience got a lot out of this. And I would like to remind our audience that if they'd like to continue the conversation with you, our thought leaders, on Twitter, they can use the hashtag PharmaVOICE, hashtag PharmaVOICE100. Your handles are in our speaker tab. So we do encourage you to connect with them. And I want to thank you, Anshal and Purohit Navigation, for sponsoring this great think tank. And I want to thank all of you for your time and your energy, for making our 24-hour celebration marathon such a success. So thanks so much.
For more PharmaVoice 100 content, visit www.pharmavoice100.com.